Like Trish, my sister from another mister, said, my name is Kari, and I am here to talk about gender bias, specifically in the workplace, and even more specifically in tech. Although I have kind of changed this up just a little bit to talk about how we, the majority of us here tonight are female, and how we can support each other and women empowerment, so that we all have a voice at the table. So tonight, the presentation is called The Glass Slipper, Xing that out from Cinderella, the glass ceiling. So you guys can, I don't know, Trish, are they able to like shout out? Or if you guys just want to populate the chat, what terms, I'll open chat if we do that. What terms come to mind when you hear gender inequality? Just start populating the chat there. Lower pay, fewer advances, pay disparity, pay. Look at that. You are not incorrect. Opportunities, pay gap, penalties for working mothers. Yes. Ignored voices, lack of recognition, networking, being talked over. Yes. I would say awesome, but it's not. Recognition and respect. Yes. Ideas taken. So tonight, these are all wonderful. Thank you, Alice, and amen. And not being recognized as a leader, for sure. So although these are kind of hard pills to swallow, we're going to talk about these. We're going to acknowledge them, and then we are going to figure out how we can support each other in overcoming these. So if we look here at this graph, we can see these are statistics from 2021. Women and women of color. So if we look over here, women and women of color have fewer seats at the C-suite and the upper levels of leadership. And women typically have to provide more evidence of their competency than their male counterparts. They are twice as likely to be mistaken for more junior roles than their male counterparts as well. So these are the things that we aim to change. The number in the C-suite, the senior VP, all of those levels, because that's unfortunately where most of the change occurs. So if we look here at microaggressions, so microaggression dates back to the 70s. It was a term that was coined by Dr. Chester Pierce, who was an African-American Harvard psychiatrist. He used it in relation to race. However, it has then kind of bled through to other areas of disparity and encompassed other groups, including women. So if we look at these definitions here, so a micro assault is the person is deliberately behaving in a discriminatory manner. They think their actions might go unnoticed and are not harmful. And so you might be talking with a male colleague and they say, well, you're just too emotional. Like you shouldn't let that bother you. Insult, micro insult, is the person is unconsciously communicating a discriminatory message to you. So they could possibly assume that the newer woman that they haven't met before in the boardroom is of a lesser role. Oh, look, you might be the new admin. Can you book that meeting for me next time? That'd be helpful. Micro invalidations are when the person makes verbal statements that deny, negate, or undermine the realities. I'm sorry that you took my comment that way. So it's kind of that reverse blaming that so often occurs. So here are some other examples. So you have introduced yourself as Anne, yet John in finance keeps referring to you as Annie, even though that's undermining you, using unauthorized nicknames, lesser terms. Oh, the girls in accounting can do that for you. Would they really say, oh, the boys in finance or the boys in IT? Probably not. They would say the men in IT. And then the perceived gender-related skills. Again, coming back to that booking the meeting for me. That's one when I was with my last company that came up very often. Can you book the meeting? Can you take those notes? Can you do these roles that are not in your role when the male in the room is fully capable of taking notes? And then, so some of the examples that we can try instead, well, what do you prefer to be called? And so instead of referring to someone as, like, let's say their name is Elizabeth and you want to call them Lizzie, ask them, what do you prefer to be called? What is your preference in name? Or if you overhear someone saying the girls in accounting, you can literally refer to them as their names. Oh, you mean Christy and Marie? Or you can kind of ignore that and deflect the statement of, can you book that meeting for me? And just say, oh, I'm super tied up. Can you take care of that? So just kind of deflecting that, putting it back on that person. So we're just going to watch a 2-minute, like a little 2.5 snippet of this on what it really sounds like in the workplace.
A few years ago, I had a corporate feminist dream job, launching a company's national initiative to recruit more female employees in the finance sector. But first, I had to get the signed-off support of all department heads. So I spent months perfecting the proposal, presented it, and won the support of almost everyone. But in this team, there were 2 men we'll call Howard and Tom. Howard just would not get back to me. I emailed him about the proposal. I left him voicemails. I'd roll my chair back and forth during meetings, trying to make eye contact with Howard. He'd just take out his phone and start scrolling. And then I started to question myself. Had I been diplomatic enough in that email? Too demanding in that voicemail? Does Howard hate this proposal, or am I just overreacting? It's probably just me, I thought. And then one day, I'm walking down the hall, and here comes Howard. He's holding a packet of papers, sees me, and lights up. He says, "Sarah, Tom just emailed this to me. You should take a look. It's a proposal for us to recruit more women. I think Tom is a really great idea here, and we should all get behind it." Howard proceeds to hand my own proposal back to me and explains to me the many merits of what I wrote. Howard was never against recruiting more women, but he needed to hear from a man why it was important to hire more women. And as this scene played out, I said nothing. Because I knew somehow that I was a guest in a place that wasn't meant for me. And so instead of questioning my environment, I questioned myself. I had a corporate feminist dream.
There we go. And how often does that happen? How often do we propose something? How often do we state an idea in a meeting? It goes unnoticed until a male counterpart states the exact same thing. And then what do? You just sit there dumbfounded, and you hope that someone else in the room is going to speak up for you. So we're going to address that in a little bit on how we can speak up for each other in those instances when you're uncomfortable or dumbfounded, just taken completely aback, and you don't know how to speak up for yourself in those situations. So let's add a little levity here. Okay, so this was a literal question, I guess statement more so, in Jeopardy. 21st century word that happens when a man patronizingly tells a female about a topic that she already understands. Mansplaining. Yes, it is so ubiquitous that it was featured on Jeopardy. Okay, so in the subtleties of bias, we look here at workplace housework, making the coffee, again, going back to taking those notes, restocking paper, those kind of thankless committees that go A, without compensation, And B, don't count towards your performance review. They aren't taken into account during your performance review. They could actually negatively affect your performance review because it's taking time and energy away from what is really going to pertain to your performance review. And I'm not saying don't get involved, and I'm not saying don't do those extras that make you you. I'm just saying just be mindful and conscious about how much of yourself you're giving that's also then taking away from your work. And different behavioral standard. I mean, we know this in our personal lives. Women who are assertive can be labeled as aggressive. And so I was at a conference this past weekend, and I was telling someone who I've known for 20 years, my new role is a director, and they're like, that really suits you. You're aggressive. And I was like, thanks, I guess. I mean, it just doesn't sit well at sometimes. So women who are kind of assertive or aggressive, often labeled as bitches, witches, combative, but their male counterparts are often praised for their behaviors as ambitious and competent. If we look at interrupting, I know this was brought up when we talk about that gender inequality being talked over. Men interrupt their female colleagues 33% more than their male counterparts. We also find, like I stated earlier, that when we voice an idea, it might get minimal traction, but then Bob sitting next to me, he voices the exact same idea, and everyone's like, oh, great. Kind of like Howard was talking, or Sarah was talking about with Howard in the video that we just saw. Being omitted from meetings. This was one that came up a lot at my last workplace. And so women are often sidelined in meetings where they really do need to have a voice. It is their job to be an integral part of that meeting, but yet they're sidelined or they're purposefully left out. And then making assumptions about career goals. And so this actually happened to me, and it's not just men who do this, it's women as well. When I was having my daughter, I was asked, are you coming back? Are you coming back full time? When are you coming back to work? And so they just assume that you possibly aren't coming back, or that you're not going to be able to have the role that you do currently. And so here's another one.
I'm really happy for you. I'm gonna let you finish.
That's called business. I did not. Yeah, for 30 years. Wrong.
Actually,
do you know? Sorry, do you mind if I ask this question?
You can, but I just want to pick you up on that one point.
Are you aware of any
Although
communications?
a lot of people were at the convention, it's conceivable that somebody
Sir,
came
I
up to me.
have just a few.
Will you let me qualify
And are you aware of
at this moment?
the basis for you refusing to answer the
Chairman,
majority
the
of
witness
questions that
should
have been
be
asked
allowed
of
to
you?
answer the question.
Senators will allow the chair to control the hearing. Senator Harris, let him answer.
You couldn't reconstruct everything that was going on at the cocktail party in the room, right?
That's right.
What's so striking
So
about
it's not- so we don't have
ADS
just
CFT
shadows.
duality is that there's enough information. Oh, I'm sorry. I always get heckled.
And so that there, right there.
I'm really happy for you. I'm gonna let you finish.
So that right there is an example of that last gentleman didn't even know that he was talking over. It's just, it happens all the time. And unless we speak up for each other, and unless we hold that space for each other, it's going to continue to happen. So here are some other examples. Jasmine, looking at the fourth quarter goals, we need to expedite this project. Crickets. Trevor, we need to hurry up on the project with the fourth quarter coming up. Great idea. Thanks, Trevor, for bringing that up. Or congratulations, you're pregnant. Like I stated, are you planning on coming back? Do you think you're going to be able to come back and have the same role? So it highlights that a woman's voice, you have an idea, but it goes unheard. The exact same thing has happened, but it's often praised by a male. And so in the second example, has anyone ever heard of a father being asked if they were going to come back to work after their wife had a baby? Highly doubt it. I've been working for 20 years and haven't heard it. So if we look here at the impacts of microaggressions on women, unequal wages, which we talked about, and then some of the things that I don't know if we really understand what happens to us physically as well as psychologically. And so in 2022, literally 4 months ago, the pay gap was still 82 cents per dollar that a man makes. And in the tech industry, 2 different studies indicated that men were paid higher than women in the exact same position 59% of the time. So even suggested in the name micro, it may appear small, but it's that compound effect, and it just keeps going and it compounds over time. They have a significant impact on an employee's experience, on your experience, on physical health, psychological well-being. So if we look at the physical part of it, the stress of being in those situations on a regular basis, like I said, those day in and day out occurrences, stress can increase your cortisol levels, increase heart rate, elevate BP, decrease sleep quality. And so all of those things compound to create this physical unwellness in us. And then if we look at the psychological impact, it's creating and increasing these mental illnesses like depression and anxiety that are so common in women. And especially with COVID taking effect, the most of that toll was put onto women, put onto working women to continue to work 8 hours a day and parent your children all day while you're at home, go through school and all of that. All of that was put on women. Women in droves left the workforce during COVID or right after. So if we look here at the microaggression on companies, so I know that in the past we've had some people in Women Who Code who were in like the HR realm of this, recruiting, those kind of things. So for those of you in HR who have HR's ear, if we look at job satisfaction, engagement, organizational commitment, professional self-efficacy, feelings of competence, and workplace performance. And so it's not only costly for an individual, but it's also costly for a company. So we take that into effect. Prolonged gender bias has a domino effect, and it affects the company as a whole. Decreased job satisfaction leads to angry employees, decreased engagement, not only in their tasks, but decreased engagement in the company as a whole. They just lose commitment to the company, to the organization. They have a decline in efficacy of their tasks, so on, so forth. So it not only affects the individual, the women, your colleagues, your female colleagues, but it takes a toll on the company as a whole. And if we look here, so for some of those who are in leadership positions, if we look at performance biases, so when you go to do your performance evaluations, there is performance support bias. And so women aren't getting support like they do of their male counterparts. So this occurs when employers or managers provide more resources to one gender over the other. A study found that women are unfairly assigned inferior accounts, even when they produce the same results given equivalent sales opportunities. So if you are in the position where you're not only doing tech, but your company also does project management and things like that, oftentimes women in the exact same role, in the exact same level, if you will, are getting passed up for those opportunities and given to, they're taking the lesser contracts, the ones that don't have the dollar tag, the dollar sign that is accompanied to the million, of dollar projects. When we look at the performance reward bias, this occurs when an employee is rewarded differently than another gender. So promotions, raises, bonuses. Women and minorities who receive the exact same performance evaluation score compared to their male counterpart receive a lower pay increase and bonus. And so that is the same, especially compounded for our women of color. And so if we look here in performance review bias, this is when an employee is reviewed differently than another gender. So HBR, so Harvard Business Review, found that performance reviews are really biased. Without structure, to them and without a rubric, if you will, without explicit instruction and how you do them and what goes into them, people are more likely to be reviewed on stereotypes related to gender than to their merit. So this is obviously where the glass ceiling comes in. So the glass ceiling, we've all heard of it. It's a metaphor for this intangible hierarchical impediment that prevents women from elevated levels of professional success. So due to all of these that happened before, this is what's preventing women in droves from reaching those leadership and those C-suite positions. So in this section here, this is going to be talking a little bit more towards what we do as women, how we support each other, but also how leadership or those who wish to become leaders, and it doesn't matter your role, you can still be a leader in a company. And so those who wish to have to encompass that the leader role within your company, this is where we're going to kind of talk about how you respond when you respond. So if we look here on how to respond. So I know that we have mainly women here. However, we do have some males. Thank you. And these are things that you can utilize at any time, whether you're male or you're female, and you can support your female colleagues this way. So there's 10 ways to respond to microaggressions at work. So I'm not going to cover all of them, but if we look at clarifying. So can you say more about what you mean by that? I'm just calling them out, asking for their intent on impact. I know you didn't realize it, but when you say X, Y, or Z, it is fill in the blank of the feeling that, happens inside of you. So instead, could you X, Y, Z? Challenge them. So another way to look at it might be blank, or in my experience, this is what happens. So, and then also you can do show value. So I know that you really care about X, Y, and Z. And when you say that, it undermines those intentions. So there's a whole bunch here that we can look at, challenging the stereotype. If it comes down to it, company policies, however, if you can go about it in a different way, then that might be felt a little bit more. If we look here at when to respond. So there's opportunities here to either let it go, respond immediately, or respond later. And there's benefits to each. So for a long time, it's been the default to not really address statements or behaviors at work, but that can again lead to that compound effect. And it again, not only affects the individual, but the organization as a whole. So if we look at responding immediately, this allows the transgression to be called out with the impact explained while the details are still fresh. The approach can be risky when the actor gets defensive, targeted team member feeling that they might be labeled as overly sensitive. So let's say I am there's microaggressions occurring against me and Trish speaks up. So Trish speaks up right in the moment. What could happen then is it could lead me to feel that I'm being overly sensitive about a subject. And then let's just say that, Bob was was demonstrating microaggressions against me. That could then getting him feel defensive. But the benefit of that is it's called out right then and there so that it's fresh in everyone's mind and everyone in that room gets to see what really happens. And then if we talk about it later, you can temper your response. You can go privately and explain why it's offensive. So we're all professionals. You want to obviously use some discernment. And then if you just let it go, this is going to be your decision. Sometimes it feels better just to let it go. And sometimes it feels better to address the situation at hand. So again, you have the power in either addressing it or letting it go, your choice. So if we look here at allyship, so for our male counterparts that are in the room and for each other, we can speak up, share opportunities, publicly celebrate accomplishments, You share that non-promotable, those committees, that non-promotable or non-performance based workload, and be visible, be there for each other. So if we look here at the golf course picture, oftentimes deals can be made on the golf course. I know that they were in the past, but they're not necessarily all made on the golf course now. So we need to really put ourselves out there, speak up for each other, share opportunities with each other. So my word for 2023, we all think of that word at the beginning of 2023. My word was uplift. Came to me, it was during a workout, came to me, I was like, uplift. All right, so how do we uplift others? How do we support other women? How do we uplift ourselves? So as we've learned thus far, women get less airtime and get interrupted more. So we can set an example at meetings, sit front and center, speak up, ask other women's opinions at meetings about whatever the topic of conversation is. There's a new project that's going to occur. Ask, ask Amanda how she feels about it. What is her opinion? Make other women in the room, especially as leaders, make other women in the room voice their opinion. If a male colleague starts to interrupt a female, you can always interject and say, oh, I'd really like to hear what she has to say. I'd like her to finish. And then literally ask her to finish her statement. Challenge the likability. So often, and I'm very guilty of this, so often we want people to like us. A, it's just easier, and B, I think it's ingrained in women. We want them to like us. Men are supposed to be assertive, confident, so therefore their leadership is welcome. But women are supposed to be nurturing and collaborative. And I'm not saying anything wrong with being collaborative, but this leadership goes against the expectations or the likability, and then that often translates to aggressive and ambitious. I praise myself on being ambitious. Yes, I am ambitious. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But a man is then labeled as confident and strong, never, hardly ever aggressive. So if you hear a woman being called bossy, oh, well, can you give me an example of that? When did you see that happen? So ask them for examples. Oftentimes they can't provide them. It's just the feeling that they have. Again, microaggression. So celebrate each other. Women are often given less credit for successful outcomes. Look for opportunities to celebrate their accomplishments. Group chats. We did this really well at my last company during our every other week meeting, giving shout outs to other company members, to other females in your work. Shout them out publicly in meetings right then and there. Oh, that was an amazing idea, Lauren. Great. Okay, somebody write that down so we don't forget it. Easy as that. Encourage women to go for it. Oftentimes, women tend to work harder to prove that we are worth it. And so, but more often, we don't take the step and we don't go for it. Champion each other. Believe in each other. This is what Trish did for me when I was there. You have to share your goals with other women. You have to share your goals with other women. Otherwise, we're not going to know how we can support you. Let them know how you like to be supported. Okay. So again, uplift other women. Learn. So this is for all of us. So if we commit if our male counterparts commit a microaggression, own up to it, call each other out on it. You can admit, you can learn, apologize, don't get defensive, and don't deny the wrongdoing. Invalidating an experience of someone else is a microaggression within itself. So I always tell, this is a real life example, has nothing to do with work, has to do with home. I have a toddler at home. She falls, she gets hurt. My husband says, that didn't hurt. I'm like, well, how do you know that didn't hurt? She just fell and skinned her knee. Maybe it was the worst thing that happened to her today. She's 3. Maybe it didn't hurt you. You have to think about that. You're invalidating people's feelings when they come to you and say X, Y, or Z hurt my feelings, or X, Y, or Z made me feel, this way or that way. And so making sure that, I am so sorry that that happened. What can we do to rectify the situation? And addressing these biases and microaggressions. So again, in recruiting, this is for my HR friends here. So like to come to the table with solutions. So in recruiting, identify gender bias in the recruiting processes. Job titles. Is it a chairman that you're looking for, or a chairperson? So wording in the description can be off-putting. There's phrases like XYZ company is aggressively searching for. Aggressively tends to be a male-led word. You can replace that with a gender neutral word like proactively or energetically. And on the flip side, words like collaboration and share tend to be more feminine. So there are actually AI that you can put through. You can put your job postings through, and it will actually pinpoint all of those. Pay attention for pronouns in your job postings. So instead of saying he or she, you can just say, as a project manager, you will blah, blah, blah. And so again, you can look at those gender decoders to look for gender biases in your job postings. At my last company, we had somebody in the middle of the meeting, of course, because he's a genius, ran some of ours through, and they inherently were actually more feminine than they were masculine. So we also may have heard that women are less likely to apply for positions. So I'm going to kind of blow your mind with this statistic. Women are less like the belief is that women are less likely to apply for a position unless they meet 100% of the requirements, whereas males apply if they only meet 60%. This is actually based on speculation from Hewlett-Packard, from HP. So research has been conducted illustrating that women feel that they need to only meet 56% of the requirements, and men feel like they only need to meet 52%. So kind of blow your mind with that statistic. So we're not at that 100%, of every bullet point that comes with a job. But I do know that oftentimes women will apply for jobs when they meet, let's just say, like it says, 56%. So if you're looking at those bullet points and there's 10 of them, let's say you hit 6 of them and you're like, can I do it? Should I do it? Where a man's going to look at probably about 5 of them, maybe even less, and say, well, I can't do it now, but guess what? I can. So this was really hit home when my sister was applying for a new position. She's an attorney. She always wanted to be a general counsel for a corporation. And so she was like, well, and she was interviewing with the CEO and was like, I don't know how to do X, Y, or Z. And he's like, but can you learn? And she's like, well, yeah. And he's like, okay, then. And so like to him, that was just a no-brainer. He's like, well, but you're smart. You are an attorney. You've been an attorney for about 15 years now. And so why wouldn't you think that you couldn't learn these skills? I'm looking for you as a person. I'm not looking to see if you can check. So that was it was kind of eye-opening there. Read this today. Changing the name on your resume to a male name or a non-gender specific name can increase your hireability 61%. Hello, J.K. Rowling. That's what she did when she was writing books so that no one knew that it was a woman. And look at her now. I mean, right there. So we also found an intriguing result that the way that participants are appraised job requirements. So men are more likely to say, kind of like what we were saying, that they met the overall job requirement. So looking at big picture, if you will. But women, when they look at the job requirements, they are very specific, and they look at each requirement separately rather than big picture. And so more detail as opposed to bigger picture. And the sum of the woman's self-perception on meeting those individual requirements was greater. So let me repeat that just because it was kind of convoluted. Men are more likely to say that they met overall job requirements, but we asked participants to rate themselves against each requirement separately, and the women actually met more of the individual ones, but they didn't maybe meet, this one, this line, this line. So it's a super exciting opportunity to be able to close that gender gap and the self-perceptions that women have. So again, looking at our hireability, looking at those recruiting tools. So in reducing the gender bias, whether you're in leadership today, tomorrow, it's important to know that we all can reduce gender bias in the workplace. So we need to analyze the disparities between the genders by departments, seniority, and retention. Half of men believe that women are well represented at their company when 90% of the senior leaders are men. So let me read that again. Half of men believe that women are well represented at a company when 90% of their senior leaders are men. Last time I checked, that is not how the gender goes. So conducting pay audits to identify how men and women are both paid and promoted differently. So these are things that you can do from a leadership standpoint, or you can talk to HR about. So on top of employee engagement surveys, so I know that my last company did employee engagement surveys, you do stay interviews, those kind of things. Whenever we conduct perception surveys, so within those stay interviews or within those employee engagements, these perception surveys, how do you perceive your work? How do you perceive your job? Can help to foster a culture of trust and provide a blueprint for action. So again, looking at those job postings and analyzing those gender words on your job postings there. So mentoring. So we do this all the time as women. But one company found that the mentees, so the ones being mentored, were 5 times more likely to obtain higher promotions and pay increases than ones who didn't participate in the programs. And the mentors were 6 times more likely to obtain a raise. So it works twofold. The same study found that the retention rate was 23% higher for mentees who actively participated in a mentorship program and 20% higher for the mentor. So in leadership training, we know that leadership training aids in growing careers, growing our success, leading teams. These trainings can reduce gender bias, close the gap, and help to shatter that glass ceiling. We can look at doing blind evaluations. So one way to decrease the wage gap is to standardize processes and practices and removing names from evaluation processes when interviewing for internal candidates. So you have a position open for a higher job, and you're looking at John and you're looking at Sally, and you want to omit the names from those and look at the objective data. And so again, you can ask candidates the same questions. So oftentimes I know that in interviews, either party can start to steer the interview one way or another. And so you want to make sure that you are asking the exact same questions for all candidates and defining clear thresholds for performance management, setting standards for processes and providing benchmarks for all employees across the board, ensuring diverse teams. No surprise here. Gender diverse teams are 70% better at making decisions than all male teams. So Deloitte conducted a study a while ago looking at the percentage of women partners that they had. So their company, they conducted an internal study of this. 5%. Many thought that this was because women left to stay at home with children. But that wasn't the case. They actually left for other firms where their voices were being heard. And they not only had a seat at the table, but they also had a voice. That's important. It's a key takeaway. I'm going to repeat that again. It's not only important to have a seat at the table, it's of the utmost importance to have a voice at that table. So if we look here at becoming a bias interrupter. So during the hiring process, we look at that. Research illustrates that women are 79% more likely to get hired if at least 2 women are in the finalist pool. We can establish objective data and define the cultural fit, but with accountability. So when any open role presents itself, make sure that you rate all applicants using the same rubric. Write down qualifications that are required. So especially if you're doing a more than one person interview, you're doing a team interview, you want to write down qualifications that you all agree upon, and then review the resumes and how you can utilize that person. You want to be cognizant in the referral hiring. Check your bias at the door. Doesn't belong. Reach out to social networks, focus on women and minorities. Structure interviews with skill-based questions. What would you do in X situation? And ask the same questions again, continuity, asking the same questions to every candidate. You can pose problem-solving questions during interviews. If we look at the right side of the column, day-to-day basis, women report doing 20% of the housework and the emotional support around the office. So again, according to an article from HBR, the Harvard Business Review, women engineers report a worker bee expectation over their white male counterparts. Meanwhile, the glamour work, the praised work often leads to promotions and networking goes to their white male counterparts. So this leads to a direct result in a lower impact projects for women and far fewer opportunities to rise to those senior level positions. So in terms of gender bias in software engineering, so in tech, women are often delegated to the maintenance type versus the green field. So fixing the stuff as opposed to the creating of the things. The troubleshooting and documentation often go to women as well.
Kari, can I jump in on that? I'd
Yes,
love
please.
to see in a chat if our female engineers that are on the calls, are you experiencing that where you're put into a maintenance role instead of greenfield apps? I'd love to see a count of that. I know in my experience as an engineer that happened consistently, and I'm curious to hear. So anyway, go ahead. I'm not seeing any responses in the chat, so we can go ahead. So
Okay, if any pop up, let me know.
Will do. Thanks.
So again, if we look at this organizational intervention, representation matters across the organization in all sectors, not just in tech. People want to see themselves belonging to a group. And so that's the important part, is the belonging to a group. And it is our responsibility to ensure that people are not looked at or not felt as an outsider. So if we take a look at the culture and the diversity on your team, implement change, and if necessary, on paper. Change can look super easy, but it's not always easy as it seems. All right. Those, and if anyone wants, I have references. Lots. So if anyone needs a copy of this, I am more than happy to provide it for you. We have lots and lots of references here. Okay. So thank you guys. I am willing to stay on for questions.
So there was a suggestion of actually having a poll for that question, as there could be reporting relationships or so a confidential poll on the question of, are you as an engineer routed towards maintenance versus greenfield? I don't know how to do a poll, and I'm not sure if anyone else does. I'm looking around here, and I don't see a way to do that. Kari, do you know how to do that?
I'm looking.
Usually there's an option, but I don't see it. There's a
It could be.
whiteboard.
Yeah, I think that won't give us the confidentiality that we're hoping for. So that might be something that we put out as a separate poll, because that's something I am curious about. And so I'll figure out a way to do that, just to send out the poll to our women, all of our women who code engineering and members, that we'll do separately.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
That's a great thing to bring up.
So what questions, comments can I answer?
Okay, don't kill me, but I have a bunch.
Go for
I'm
it.
putting it in the chat.
Okay,
I've been
so in the
thinking about
chat.
this since you did this in November, Kari, so. And I've only
Okay.
gone to happy hour with you once, so.
Okay, so Lauren's question is, can you talk a little bit about the consequences that more often than not occur when we try some of these tactics, such as taking up space? Celebrating wins is an alternative tactic that ruffles less feathers, correct, I agree, but it seems like both angles are necessary. So that is a great question, and there's always consequences, but I don't always think the consequences are bad. So I always tell, like, I mean, I tell my daughter that was the decision she made, and this is your consequence. It's neither wrong nor right, and it's not good or bad, but so consequence is just what occurs after a behavior. And so if we look at that, I think that it's going to take more people standing up. And I think it's going to actually take it from, unfortunately, we live in a world where it's trickle down. And so it's going to take leaders asking, in doing these things. So it's going to take the leaders, both male and female, whenever someone is interrupted, for the interrupter to be called out, or just say, oh, I'm sorry, Kari wasn't finished, or, let me just finish what I'm saying right now. It's going to take, it's going to, and again, if I can't hone in on that word enough, that micro part of it. And so it's going to take that compound effect of doing it over and over and over again. And so what if you're shy? Yeah. If you're an introvert, this is where we need to uplift each other, because it's going to take someone like me who talks to walls and is totally happy doing so, speaking up for the people who are more introverted, who are a little bit more shy, who don't want to ruffle feathers, if you will. It's going to take us being that for other women, for sure. And there's so much work to do, Lauren. There really is. And
I would add too, I mean, maybe I'll just jump in and add that if you're thinking about retribution can become an HR issue. If you're speaking up for yourself and you're standing up for yourself, and then you see things that are retribution coming back at you and certainly there's scale to that, but those are issues that can be taken to an HR representative if you feel comfortable and safe to do that. And I'll jump back to Kari.
Yeah. And then she asks, how do we address the bipartisan say it for me, politics of everything? We'll just go with that word. Been a speech therapist for 20 years. No. So how do we talk about gender equality even when the topic could make you the enemy to half of the population? That is true. And I think that bounces right back to what Trish just said. I know that this has occurred in the past. People have been called out for it. Not people who, the person who did the bias has been called out on it. And again, I think it's just going to make the compound effect in the compiling of it that's going to have to keep occurring and keep occurring and keep occurring.
I would jump into that too, that I think we may think it's a 50% that we might be making an enemy of half the population, but I don't think it is. I think there are more advocates, male advocates, than we think and that we know of. And I see more and more men standing up for women and calling out behaviors when they know it. And so the more that our male counterparts learn about the things, thank you, John, for attending, the more they know and see, because they don't realize necessarily when they see something happen. But once they're educated on it, they're like, yeah, I could see that now. So I do think it's not 50-50 anymore. But
Is it Alana?
You nailed it first time, Elena. I just really quickly wanted to share a little bit of maybe a reframe for some of the hesitation that might come up, or maybe shyness when it comes to like calling out some of this behavior. I once had a really awesome coach tell me one time, we've got to name it to tame it. And part of that coaching conversation, she challenged me to rethink the challenging, instead of thinking of it as like like trying to argue, thinking of it as approaching it like with a curious mindset. And so earlier, I know, Kari, you mentioned some of those different techniques. One of them was asking some clarifying questions. That's been a huge help to me. So really like staying curious and genuinely asking, what does that mean? Or what did you mean by that? Not only, calls out that particular behavior, but it also highlights to, I would say, I don't know, maybe like 90% of the people that I asked that to, they generally didn't understand either the connotation that that question had, or, maybe understand how somebody could take that out of context in that conversation. So it's a learning opportunity on both sides, a lot of the times. And like Trish was saying, there's way more advocates than we are aware of. And so just staying curious kind of shows you who those advocates are. It helps people learn, different ways to communicate better, and just helps you kind of, just ask a genuine question of what does that mean, and kind of get some clarification on whatever the topic is at hand. So I hope that helps, because I totally understand the shyness component, 100%.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Sylvia stated here that the men in my previous company always joked about other women in front of me. They were so comfortable doing it that they were doing it in front of her. And then she said, one day I had enough, and I said, I wonder what your wife would say after hearing that. Yep. All tactics to use. And that was the last time that they ever joked in front of me. Took years to speak up, but I believe speaking up is better no matter what the consequences are. Wonderful. Thank you, Sylvia, for sharing that.
Sylvia also calls out something that is interesting to me, and a side effect of when we let things go and we don't address them, people can become very comfortable in performing and having behaviors of bias without getting, if I'm not getting called on it, I'm just going to feel emboldened to continue that. And so I've seen that in my career as well. So that kind of gives us a little nudge of, we do want to address issues as we see them and try to find great ways to do it, which we've given a lot of tools tonight to do that. But if we don't speak up and speak up for each other, then we're not changing. We're making things worse. Elena's got to name it to tame it. I love it.
I might have to steal that.
Yep. Elena's got all kinds of cool phrases.
What other questions, comments?
Any other questions?
Kari, thanks so much for taking time this evening to share your presentation with us. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Anytime.
Yeah, and I do want to jump in and just kind of thank Kari. And I want to repeat, because I didn't get this on the recording, that Kari is the Director of Therapy Relief at Hope here in St. Louis, Missouri. She's got 17 years of experience in emotional intelligence, DEIB, and additionally to her healthcare and physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy skill sets. She's a woman leader in St. Louis, and we are so lucky to have had you tonight, Kari, and this was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
I'm honored that you asked me. And I have other presentations if you ever need them again.
Oh, you know it. We'll have to meet for happy hour to talk through that.
Darn.
So thank you everybody for coming tonight. This has been, we have great attendance tonight. I'm super excited to see new faces and new names in the list. Please join us again. We'll have, hopefully earlier this time, we'll have our content out for the next full meeting, evening meeting at the end of May. And then join us for coffee talk on the first Wednesday of the month at 8:30. It will be in fact, it's already posted, I believe, in Meetup. And that will continue a little bit more around this topic of we're where we thought we were. So that'll be the next topic. There'll be an article that we post that you can read that first, and then we'll just chat and talk about it. So thank you again tonight. We're going to go ahead and sign off, and appreciate everybody coming.
Thank you, everyone.